Peaches are a favorite summer crop around our house and probably across the state of Oklahoma. It just doesn't seem like you've really been there until you've had the juice dripping down your chin. Today we're going to do something with peaches that a lot of us think about doing, but don't necessarily do it as often as we might want to have, and that's make homemade ice cream using peaches. And we're also going to throw in some toasted pecans to make it a little bit special. One of the things that people often have a problem with ice cream is the high fat content. And so I'm going to teach you a little bit about how to take almost any recipe and cut the fat content way down. The original recipe I started with had something like, 24 grams of total fat in it, which is a lot more than most of us would want to have in a day. So I'm going to make some substitutions and drop that down from 24 to 9. And it's very easy to do, and in fact it saves you money. Now the original recipe called for 3 cups of half and half, and I'm changing half and half to whole milk. And that's simply a standard change you can make. If your recipe calls for whole milk, switch to skim milk. If it calls for half and half, switch to whole milk. If it calls for whipping cream, switch to half and half. And that always will cut the amount of fat content down. I'm using 1½ cups of whole milk, and to that I'm going to add 3/4 of a cup of sugar. Now I'm using an ice cream maker that is smaller than most. As you can see, the canister or the can only holds about 2 quarts. Most of the time they hold about twice that much. So what you need to remember is that you need to adjust your recipe so that when you fill the canister it will be no more than half full. The ice cream is going to expand during freezing. Homemade ice cream does not expand as much or get as much overrun, which is the term in the commercial business, as that made by the industry, but it does increase at least twice, and so you need to have plenty of room in your canister for that expansion to take place. What's happening is that as the ice freezes, or as the milk freezes, each of the ice crystals then is going to take up more space than the original milk itself or the water did, and so you get twice as much volume. You need to stir this until you can no longer feel the sugar crystals on the bottom. And to this I'm also going to add 1½ teaspoons of vanilla, and just continue to stir that just a little bit. And now I'm going to stir in some half and half. Now I'm using 1½ cups of half and half. And this, of course, you're going to adjust. You might, if you've got a bigger canister, you could double the amounts of everything. And just stir those together as well. And this is also going to do an amazing thing at cutting down the calories. We went from original 329 calories down to 203 in a serving. Now I've got peaches here. I've peeled them by scalding them first for about 30 seconds in boiling water, putting them immediately in ice water, and that loosens the peel from them. And we are then able to take the peel off, get the pit out, and just chop them up real fine. You could do this in a food processor to speed up the whole process. And the last thing I'm going to add here is about 1/4 of a cup of toasted pecans. Stir that all together. Now you'll notice that this recipe does not have egg in it. If you're going to use egg in ice cream, you really need to make sure that you cook your mix up to at least 160 degrees. Many times it will tell you to stir it and cook it until it coats a metal spoon. That will give you the point where you've got it up to 160, so you can rest assured at that point that it's safe. But raw egg would not be. You could easily be contaminated with Salmonella enteritidis, which is risky, especially for people who are in a high-risk group, which would be the elderly, the very young, people who have immune compromise, either through cancer treatment, through having AIDS, or anything that reduces your ability to fight off disease. I'm going to add this to the canister. And remember, we don't want it much more than half full. So if this looks like a little bit more, I'm not going to add it. We'll use that in another way. This is then going to go into our freezing canister, or our freezing bucket. In the old days, these used to be made of wood. And most of the time now they're made of plastic. The wood does conduct heat less well, and so it helps keep the heat inside the canister. You want the heat inside the bucket so that the heat inside the canister can come out. And what happens is we're going to put a little bit of water in here, about a cup of cold water, and that will get the whole process started. I'm also going to put in the dasher. Now in many units the dasher is separate from the lid. In this particular one they are combined. What's going to happen is that either the canister or the can or the dasher is going to turn, depending on how your system works. And that's going to help keep the mixture stirred, and that will help keep ice crystals small, which is one of our goals. And it will also keep it scraped off the sides so that it freezes evenly. If it's all clumped up against the sides, the outside is going to freeze fast, freeze in large crystals. You'll get grainy ice cream, which is not something that most of us want. This is then going to clamp down, and then we're going to add ice and rock salt. Now you can see here is rock salt. We generally recommend rock salt when making homemade ice cream because it dissolves more slowly and it's less apt to cake. One of the things about it, however, is that it's not as pure as table salt, and so you really shouldn't be eating this kind. It's really for making ice cream, for sprinkling on the driveway when it freezes, things like that, as opposed to actually eating. Now the amount of ice and rock salt that goes in is critical as far as getting a smooth textured ice cream. You want to use basically a ratio of somewhere between 6-to-1 or 8-to-1, with 8 or 6 being the amount of ice you put in, and 1 being the amount of rock salt that goes in. So for every 2 cups of ice that you put in, you want to put in 1/4 of a cup of rock salt that you layer in, and gradually, as we have a little bit of water here to get the process of the ice melting, that will lower the temperature of the ice so that the ice is no longer at 32 degrees, but actually will come down much lower than that, because we need it to be lower than that because the mix inside won't freeze at 32. It has to be 28 or less in order for the milk, which has sugar and other things in it, to get down to a freezing point where it can actually cause the ice cream to turn into ice cream. I'm going to go ahead and put the rock salt in here and the ice, and we'll come back with one that we've already got ready for you. When your ice cream is done, if you're not going to eat it right away, which is something I've never been able not to do, but if you are going to store it for a little while or age it, it actually improves the quality of the ice cream because more of the ice crystals have time and to freeze. The fat goes better into the mixture and becomes better emulsified, so that if you can wait a little while, you can keep it up to 3-4 hours, but you need to repack it, take the dasher out because it's going to get more solidified into the system, and then repack it in good strong brine so that it stays nice and cold. You can see here that this one's been sitting for a little while, not quite as long. If you put your homemade ice cream into the freezer, it is going to freeze much more solidly than what we have here because the temperature is going to be lower and it's going to be more constant. Now this is just about a serving for one at my house. You could then put a little bit of peaches on top of that as a garnish and let everybody enjoy. Homemade ice cream is really fun. It gets kids to looking at new ways to explore the use of produce, and it also gives them a little bit of science. Why does the rock salt make the water colder? Now you can help answer their question for them. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.